I came across this debate between an atheist called Kyle Jones and a Christian called David Wood. And they were debating good without God. Is God necessary for morality? Kyle Jones took the position that we can have objective moral values and duties without God. David Wood took the position that we require God to have these objective moral values and duties. Now, what is an objective moral value and duty? An example would be the value of telling the truth. We value telling the truth, and we have a duty to tell the truth. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're not telling the truth. We have objective moral values and duties to do what's right, to follow the golden rule, to be benevolent, which is care for the in-group, and to value the out-group as well, which we'll see in examples from Shalom Schwartz and his study of the globe and the universal applications of these values to life. Everyone knows we ought to be benevolent, and we ought to follow the golden rule, and we also ought to be good to others, even in our out-group, and to the world at large. The question is, where is this sourced? This is an ontological position. It's the moral realism position. And the question is, where does it come from? If we have objective moral values and duties that stand alone and don't vary as a function of anyone's opinion, and they're transcendent to our cultures, transcendent to generations, transcendent to people, the moral lawgiver or source must also transcend cultures, generations, and people. The only possibility for that is our understanding of God. Now, can we fully understand God? God says, not quite. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Kyle Jones is going to get into a little bit of this idea, but before he does that, he's going to commit a couple of fallacies. And so we're going to observe those fallacies here. So let's go.
The idea that we would need a God, a supreme leader, a supreme cosmic authority to ground morality or any other thing sounds rather Orwellian, to say the least. We discover these things. We progress. We have social contracts. We have ways of dealing with each other through empathy, through sympathy. We have also innate within us a desire to survive and to thrive. And my desire.
And that's absolutely true. We do have desires to survive and thrive innate within us. We also have a conscience innate within us. See Romans 2:15. Our conscience tells us oftentimes to do things that go contrary to our intuitions. So it's not just a matter of intuitions and reasoning that explain our objective moral values and duties, but our conscience adds a Christian synderesis to that proposition. In other words, if we were standing at the side of a pond and we spotted an alligator lurching out at a little child, our moral intuitions would, and our desire to survive, would propel us to want to run, to save ourselves, to get away from the alligator. Our reasoning would say, well, should we try to get away from the alligator? We should, because we want to save our own selves. However, our conscience is something that God has planted within us to say, no, it's time to self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifices are contrary to what we would expect in our biological evolution. The idea of self-sacrifice and giving one's own life or risking one's own life for the benefit of another is something that's God-given. Now, I agree with Kyle Jones that we do discover our moral values. In fact, I agree that Christianity has been a tremendous boon to morality because we have been growing closer to Jesus, trying to be more as he has said. He gave us a moral exemplar through his own self-sacrifice for our benefit. He made us an offer that we really shouldn't refuse. In fact, I would say it's rather foolish to refuse his offer of salvation. We don't get to heaven based on our acts. We can't work our way there. We get there based on our faith in Jesus. But I digress. Let's go back to Kyle Jones and see if you can identify some of the fallacies that he's going to say here.
Desiring and thriving is intricately tied up to your surviving and thriving. So I think that's really where ethics and morality come from, and there's no need for any other explanation. Now, when God...
His arguments are a little circular. We have empathy, therefore we want to have empathy. And we want to survive just so we can do well. Okay, so it's a just so argument that he says we have this particular value just so we can survive. And it's kind of a fallacious thinking.
is used as an explanation, it's just like tacking it on at the end. Why is it that we have these moral facts, and it seems as if these moral facts correspond to reality?
I just want to point out there's a little background noise here in the beginning. This was filmed at Columbia University. Apparently there was some sort of an outside activity going on. So please excuse the background noise and the cheering.
And we go, we're asking too large of a question. We're asking why. These why questions are kind of set up almost to act as if they're deep and thoroughly philosophical questions, but a why question is, to me, those don't make sense, really.
Okay, so because the why question doesn't make sense to Kile Jones, therefore we shouldn't ask the why question. Got it.
Why? And the closest answer to any why is there existence? Why do we experience meaning? Why are there moral facts or whatever?
Those questions are big questions of life, and they can be well answered by Christianity. What can be answered through Christianity is our explanation of our objective morality. How do we have these moral values and duties? It can also explain what our meaning is in the greater picture of the universe. It can explain our purpose, and it explains our origins. So Christianity actually well explains many things, including the fact that we have to bear our own crosses, and we have to face tribulations.
I can equally say the answer to that is 42.
So he tries to pull the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker to the Galaxy. There was a man in that book who spent his whole life trying to figure out exactly what the purpose of life was. And he gets to the very end of the galaxy, the end of the universe, and he finds out that it's all about the number 42. It's absurd, ridiculous thinking. It's also equivalent to that the puddle argument, which is so silly.
Reference to Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is serious nerdishness right here. But to me, 42 and God make no difference in the explanation. There's nothing that it doesn't help us. Why God? Why God? Why God? It doesn't. And then you can actually flip it. Well, like why use God then? It doesn't help in any way in an explanation. When God is invoked in these debates, there's a famous and historical argument, the Euthyphro Dilemma, that a lot of us probably know about from Plato. And this Euthyphro Dilemma brings up a big problem for God. That is, God either does things because they're good, like there's some outside standard that God appeals to and goes, okay, this is good, let me will it. Or things are good because God wills it.
The problem with the Euthyphro Dilemma is it's a false dichotomy, meaning that you're told you have either two options, and only two options. It's either this or that. However, the third option, which is that God is the standard against which we judge morality, has not been presented. And that's the problem. That's a better understanding of God. Now, to Plato's dilemma, this is something that Plato and Socrates had discussed. One of the issues was he didn't have a very fine picture of exactly what God was. They weren't Christians. They didn't have, obviously, because the dilemma was created 400 years or so prior to the time when Jesus walked the earth. So they didn't have a full understanding of God as being the standard against which we judge morality. In fact, if you go back to the time of Plato and Socrates, you're going to see that they had a belief in humans as unequal, okay? Very unequal. That was their feeling back then. In fact, they thought that women were lesser, slaves were lesser value. And one of the great things about Christianity is Jesus leveled the playing field. He said we're all equal in his eyes. Equality of opportunities, very important concept in Christianity and something that people couldn't understand in the time of Plato and Socrates.
So if God willed it that murder was good, it would be good. That's this voluntarism problem. And what happens then is that morality is completely arbitrary. If whatever God wills is good, then morality is arbitrary because God could will one way or another. If God could not, then God is stuck or held to a higher standard than God's self. I don't want to say himself, Because another problem, I think, with this whole God talk is we have no idea what we're talking about. To me, saying God is like saying I have invisible, intangible, undetectable tigers in my garden. I don't think you would believe that. And you would say, well, someone would ask me, well, prove it. And I go, well, I can't. They're undetectable. They're invisible. But they're there. There's tigers there. I don't think any of you guys would believe in my invisible tigers.
This is a textbook case of the fallacy of personal incredulity. In other words, what this is saying is that the proposition must be false because it contradicts his personal beliefs and expectations. He just gave us his personal beliefs and expectations, and he thinks that we are going to now say that God must not exist, hence because Kile Jones does not find the concept of God to be something he can understand.
But, so it really genuinely doesn't help when we invoke God in this. Any of the words that we use to describe God, good, him, her, these are human words. And if God is this God we think God is, then God is infinite. God is infinitely transcendent, which means that no human words would be able to be applied to this God. The best thing you could do is remain in silence, or maybe Om. But maybe Om would be going a little too far in describing God, because God would transcend any words or any denotations about God. God would actually transcend your idea of God, as Kant properly points out. So, if we do invoke God, we need to describe this God, and when we describe this God, we use human language. That can't be applied to this God, because this God is beyond human language. So, that's another problem with God in general.
So our inability to fairly describe God or to adequately describe God, according to Kile Jones, must mean that God does not exist? Is this what he's proposing? Because that doesn't really make any sense. We're given a very good picture of what God is like through Jesus Christ. We know that Jesus Christ said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven and sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. He made a direct reference to Daniel 7. He also came in as the lowly Messiah that had been described in Zechariah 9:9. He fulfilled verses such as Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. He came at the precise time that Daniel 9 had prophesied. But I digress. Let us go back.
Not just as the basis or supposed basis of morality. And so I think that it's pretty clear that we don't need God to ground morality. I think that morality arises within us. There can be objective moral facts without God.
He says morality arises within us. What's interesting is morality is something that animals don't have. Other forms of life they're not judged by the standards we're judged. They're not given a code of morality. We do see animals acting in empathetic ways, and we would expect that. God created the animals too. However, they're not bound by the same moral code that we're bound by. And when I say bound by a moral code, that implies a divine moral lawgiver.
Just like there can be any facts without God. There can be 2 + 2 = 4 being a fact that doesn't need a ground. Or some sort of, way to justify it. I think I'm probably good, so thank you very much.
Well, good evening. I'd like to thank the students here at Columbia University for arranging this debate, and Kyle for taking up the atheist position tonight. There are several periods in history when worldviews changed radically over a short time, and I think we're living right in the middle of one of these rapid shifts. But since our worldviews can have such an important effect on many areas of life, it's always good to consider the implications of various positions. Now, as far as I can tell, the debate tonight is not about whether atheism is true or whether theism is true. It's about a much narrower topic, namely whether things like moral values and objective moral duties and moral responsibility for our actions, whether these things can make sense on a truly atheistic worldview. When you remove God from your picture of reality, have you also, whether you know it or not, just removed objective moral values, moral duties, and moral responsibility for our actions? I say you have. Kile says you haven't. So we have a disagreement, and the question is who's right? And not surprisingly, I think I am. Here are my opening statements. I'm going to focus on explaining why I came to the view that I have, why I became convinced that that if God does not exist, we don't have those sorts of things, the things that are presupposed in our discussions of morality. Then later, in my rebuttals, I'll flesh out any arguments I need to flesh out and respond to Kile's arguments. I've never actually been able to understand why atheists would want to defend objective moral values. Those are values that would be true whether we agree with them or not. If every human being in the world rejected them, these certain statements, certain moral statements would still be true. I concluded that if God does not exist, all is permissible long before I ever believed in God, and I did not see that as a weakness for atheism. At first, when I considered my place in the universe, atheism was kind of depressing, but later on, as I explored atheism further, it became much more exciting, and I would say liberating. I know I'm not sounding like a Christian right now, but that's just the way things work. So let me start with the depressing part. It's how I view the universe and our place in the universe, the human situation, when I was a few years younger than most of you in here. We've got this massive universe. And over here, there's this little collection of debris, floating debris, that we call the Milky Way. And out on one of the spiral arms of this Milky Way is this hot little ball of gas, we call the sun. And circling this hot ball of gas is a little pathetic speck of dust we call Earth. And on the surface of this little speck of dust are these little lumps of cells called human beings who are only here because their ancestors managed to transmit DNA better than other lumps of cells. And these little lumps of cells are now convinced that they have incredible worth and dignity, that what they do really, really matters, and that their values, so precious to them, are something more than whatever it was that helped their ancestors pass on their DNA, or something indoctrinated into them by society. Everything we do is the result of brain processes and chemical reactions in our brains, but our brains are made of particles, and particles are governed by laws of nature. And if our brains are governed by laws of nature, that means everything we do, everything we think was determined long before we were ever born. How can we think of ourselves as morally responsible if that's how we view the world?
See, that is a consistent atheist position. It's moral relativism. And one of the views that a lot of atheists do take is this moral relativistic position, thinking that everything is relative to other things. If you're in a culture that a particular action is considered moral, nobody from a different culture can judge that as incorrect. Now, of course, this is horribly flawed because we could apply it to people like the Nazis. The Nazis thought that they were acting in alignment with what the Germans wanted them to do. However, obviously what the Nazis were doing is egregious, and it was a violation of human standards. Okay, if we go back to the United Nations and we go to even the Declaration of Independence in the United States, we're going to see that we value human life. Everyone values human life as equal, even though we're unequal in many ways. People are different heights, they have different brain capacities, they have different struggles, they have different intellectual capabilities, they have a lot of differences, but we consider people equal. We don't go back to what it was like in Plato's time, when if you were wealthy, you were given a different sort of prison term, or you were given a sort of different punishment than if you were not wealthy. If you were a slave, you were treated much more harshly if you were a slave. You can see that in places like the Code of Hammurabi, for one. But we'll go back to David now.
So that was the depressing part, thinking about my position in the university. But things didn't stop there, and one day I had an epiphany. My friend and I, 17 years old, we broke into a store in the middle of the night, and we loaded up our backpacks, and a little later we were running down some railroad tracks from police. And they kind of had us cornered. There were cops in front of us, cops behind us, cops coming down the hill beside us that left as our only escape route, the Monongahela River, which I'd always been told not to swim because I'll drown. So we dove in, and my friend was kind of stupid. He swam straight across, and police were waiting for him. It's a big river, so police were waiting for him when he got over there. I swam at an angle upstream in the dark because I knew the area was more difficult for police to get to. So I got to the other side and realized that I had outwitted police yet again, and started making my way up the hill, which took a while. But eventually, I got up, I emerged from the wooded area and found myself in someone's backyard. And in front of me was a magnificent garden. And I had to get past the garden. So I started to walk around. And as I started to walk around, I paused to philosophize. And I thought to myself, why am I walking around this garden? I don't care about the people in that house, let alone about their vegetables. So why am I going out of my way to avoid stepping on their cucumbers? What are they going to do? Call the police who just had me cornered and I got away? What are they going to do? And as I stomped my way through that garden, I had this incredible rush of freedom. We spend a lot of our lives thinking what we're told to think and doing what we're told to do, and then one day you sit back and realize, I don't have to do any of that, and they can't make me. But David, we can throw you in jail or something. Really? You got books in there? I'd like to read. But if you do something really bad, we can kill you. Well, here's the secret. I'm going to die anyway. Once you finally grasp that if the world cannot hurt you, it cannot control you, it's this amazing sense of liberation, not scared of anything anymore. Incredible sense of freedom. I call that the false freedom now, because once you liberate yourself from all external constraints, all you've got to go on is whatever's inside of you, whatever inclinations and desires you have, and living like that gets old after a while. So, atheists have a kind of freedom which isn't tremendously spectacular, but I think it's the best you've got on atheism. And now Kile wants to steal it from you. Atheists have to follow the exact same rules that everyone else has to follow. Don't let Kile steal your freedom. Now, I understand that many atheists want to cling to objective moral values, even when I don't see anywhere that these values could be located other than our opinions, and that certainly wouldn't be any kind of objective morality. But there's a problem of consistency here. The problem of consistency is called the Skeptic's Dilemma. And it goes something like this. Theists have dozens of arguments for the existence of God. Atheists reject those arguments. But on what consistent basis can you reject all of these arguments for the existence of God and then turn to arguments for the existence of objective moral values and accept those arguments? Say those arguments are good. In other words, it kind of looks like this to me. We have what we'll call a skeptometer. Human beings have a skeptometer. It's what controls our level of skepticism, right? And we turn to arguments for the existence of God, and we don't want to believe in God, so we set our skeptometers really high so that all of those arguments fail. But then we turn to morality, which we don't want to reject. And so we set our skeptometers very low so that any argument for objective moral values will then pass. And so the question is that a good methodology? If you're changing your methodology, depending on what you'd really like to believe, is that a good methodology? I would say no. So if we want to be consistent, we can either keep our skepticism so high that all arguments for the existence of God would fail, but then we should retain that same level of skepticism, and we'd have to reject any idea of objective moral values. Or, if we want to believe in objective moral values, we have to lower our skepticism a little so those arguments are successful, but we should keep that same level of skepticism when we turn to the existence of God, and there are dozens of arguments that would pass that standard. So we either reject both or we accept both. Either way, but you don't have objective moral values without God.
I think you did a pretty phenomenal job right there. And so I wanted to just point out a couple of things. The skepticism idea and this idea of consistency is spot on. That's a challenge that many atheists have, and why many of them have gone to relative views. So what happens if you encounter somebody who says that they don't believe we have an objective truth? Here's how Pastor Mike Winger would answer that question.
So we're going to start today with a question from Colby Hill. And Colby Hill had asked, hey, Pastor Mike, my question was concerning a friend I have who does not believe in objective truth. I've tried to bring him to Christ, but I found it difficult given his epistemological views. And for anybody who doesn't know the word epistemological views, epistemology is like the study of like what we know and what knowledge is and that sort of thing. It's kind of a difficult area to study. But basically, you know, when you're telling somebody, hey, man, you need Jesus. Hey, you know, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. When they respond with, that's not true, you know, you can bring evidence to show them that the gospel is true. You could bring evidence for the resurrection of Christ. You could bring prophetic evidence to prove that the Bible is the inspired word of God. You could bring the testimony of your own life and the transformation that God has brought in your life. You could bring things like that. But what if instead of saying Christianity is not true, they say Christianity is true for you, but not for me? Or I think that's good for you, but I don't believe in objective truth. So how do you respond to this person? And I'll admit.
So I want to just point out something as far as this epistemology versus ontology. So the epistemology talks about how you come to know the truth and whether or not you believe the truth. Ontology speaks about whether the truth itself exists. And so sometimes these ideas are conflated when people are talking about truth. If the person says objective truth does not exist, they're taking an ontological position. If they say that they don't believe that Christianity is true, that's an epistemological position.
This is one of the easiest things in the world to refute and one of the hardest things in the world to change somebody's mind on, meaning it's demonstrably, obviously false, self-refuting. It's horrible to think that there is no objective truth or that, you know, we have no reality when it comes to spirituality, right? Like it's just everybody lives in la la land in their own imagination. I think this will happen when I die. And then, okay, well then you'll go where you think when you die. Muslims will go to their place. You know, Hindus will have their experience. Christians will have their experience. Jews will have their experience. Whatever they want to happen, that's what will happen because there is no real truth about it all. So how do you respond? What I kind of want to do is I want to show somebody how monumentally stupid this view is. Not because they're stupid exactly. That's not the point. It's not about their intelligence. Hugely intelligent people believe this stuff. But the view itself is really unwise. So I like to use some illustrations or questions with this person. I'll say, so there is no objective truth. Here's a question I would ask your friend. You know, there is no objective truth. And they would say, that's right. There's no objective truth. And then you could ask them, well, how did you come to know that to be true? And wait. You don't want to interrupt their thought process here. What you're doing is you're holding up a mirror to their own view and you're showing them, wait a minute, there's no objective truth is a truth claim. If there is no objective truth, then it's true that there's no objective truth, which means there is objective truth. This is what's called a self-refuting truth claim. It literally cannot be true. It's impossible. Truth is inevitable. It's unavoidable. You can't fight against it. All right. It just that's how life works. So you could use other illustrations. So one person is thinking, okay, but in matters of faith, in matters of belief, there's no objective truth. And even that itself is self-refuting because that's an objective truth claim about beliefs. So that's self-refuting. But it's very heartwarming because you could look at everybody in every religion and be like, I believe all of you all. And it's very, you know, la la land, good ship lollipop kind of theology. And people like that because it helps them get along. But I like to use this illustration. I've used this in the youth ministry before. I said, let's pretend that I think I used 4 guys. 4 guys go up in an airplane, and they all know when they get to the top of 10,000 feet, they're going to jump out. They're going to be pushed out of the airplane, whether they like it or not. And so they all prepare according to their beliefs, according to their faith. So one man believes that he is going to go straight out the airplane and he's going to fly. So his preparation is to put on a Superman outfit, and he has a super suit, and he's going to fly. That's what he truly believes it. Another man believes that he's going to go up into space. And so when he jumps out of the plane, he prepares by bringing a spacesuit, and he's wearing a spacesuit so he can survive in the outer atmosphere. And then another man believes that he's going to fall like a rock. I guess there's 3 guys. He's going to fall like a rock, and so he brings a parachute. So we have supersuit, spacesuit, parachute. We got those 3 things. Ask your friend, what happens when they jump out of the plane? Right? 2 of them die, 1 of them survives. And then when they, you may have to fight them to get them to admit this. You may have to, like, not fight, but you know what I mean? You have to work with them because they realize the implications of this are hurtful to their opinions. So then you say, what if the person just totally believes? What if with all their heart they believe they'll fly? Does that mean they'll fly? And the answer is, of course, going to be no. Now you apply this to what happens when we die. One man thinks that when he dies, he's going to stop existing, so he has no preparation for his death. He's just going to die. Another man believes that when he dies, he's going to go and experience 70 virgins and go into the Muslim version of heaven because he was a good Muslim. And so he prepares accordingly, right? So maybe he wages jihad. This is not most Muslims, obviously, right? This is a hypothetical scenario. So he wages jihad, wages holy war as a way of trying to ensure his eternal fate. This is like wearing the spacesuit, right? And then another man says, no, I know I'm a sinner. I know I'll stand before God and I'll have to be punished for my sins unless I have faith and trust in Christ. So he puts his trust in Jesus. He puts his faith in Christ. All 3 of those die. What happens next? What we should all agree on is it's not whatever these guys want or believe. It's based upon the reality of what we face the moment we die. That's what happens. What's the reality? What really happens is based on truth, objective truth, not based on my beliefs. So while Christianity, your salvation hinges upon your faith, it's not, your faith isn't actually causing the salvation or anything. It's the objective reality of the identity of God, the person of Christ, the death and resurrection of Jesus, dying for your sin. And then he says, believe in me, begin relationship with me. I will redeem, I have redeemed, and I'll apply that redemption to you, and I will forgive you, and all that. So there's a few things. Walk them through some thought experiments that relate the real world to beliefs and show how it doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is what's objectively true.
And I think that that's a spot-on argument. I hope that you found that compelling. I hope you found this video interesting. And so I wanted you to please like, subscribe, and do come again. And remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God.